Have you ever realized that the people who were supposed to love you the most had been making plans that never included you? Imagine standing by your bedroom window every June, watching your parents load expensive suitcases into the family SUV. Your younger brother laughed as he picked which beach toys to bring, while your mother reminded him not to forget his sunglasses. Your father checked the GPS, smiled proudly, and promised him another unforgettable family vacation. Then your mother would turn toward you with the exact same fake smile she'd used every summer for nearly a decade. "Emily, Aunt Margaret can't wait to see you. You'll have so much fun on the farm." Fun. That word became a joke. Because every summer wasn't a vacation for me. It was an exile. For 9 straight years, my parents sent me hundreds of miles away so my younger brother could enjoy what they called real family time. I spent birthdays alone. I missed every family photograph, every beach trip, every Disney vacation, every Thanksgiving reunion they held early because of my brother's school schedule. They erased me so completely that strangers assumed my parents had only one child. But here's the thing they never expected. The lonely little girl they kept sending away didn't stay little forever. And one day the daughter they treated like luggage became the only person who could save everything they'd spent 30 years building. When they finally came begging for help, I looked at them, smiled politely, and gave them the exact same answer they had given me every single summer. "Sorry, this is family only." Before we continue, if you enjoy emotional family stories with unexpected twists, heartbreaking betrayals, and satisfying endings, please watch this video until the very end. Every minute reveals another piece of the truth behind this family's decisions. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next emotional story. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Emily Carter, and I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. People always told me how lucky I was. My father, Richard Carter, owned a successful architecture company. My mother, Susan Carter, taught literature at a prestigious private school. We lived in one of those neighborhoods where children rode bicycles safely until sunset, and every lawn looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. From the outside, we were the perfect American family. Inside, we were something entirely different. I was 6 years old when my little brother, Ethan, was born. Everyone expected me to be jealous. Instead, I adored him. I helped feed him. I read bedtime stories to him. I pushed his stroller around the neighborhood. Whenever he cried, I was usually the first person trying to make him laugh. I honestly believed we'd grow up as best friends. I had no idea my parents had already begun deciding which child mattered more. The first strange thing happened the summer after Ethan turned 1. Dad came home carrying colorful travel brochures. Disney World, Universal Studios, the beaches of Florida. Mom spread them across the dining table like treasure maps. I remember bouncing excitedly in my chair. "Can we ride the big castle rides?" I asked. Dad smiled, but it wasn't really directed at me. "We're thinking about taking Ethan somewhere special." I laughed. "So all of us?" Mom and Dad exchanged a quick glance. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but even as a 7-year-old, I noticed it. Mom cleared her throat. "Actually, we thought you might enjoy spending the summer with Aunt Margaret." I frowned. "For how long?" "Just a few weeks." Those few weeks became nearly the entire summer. I cried the morning they dropped me off. Aunt Margaret hugged me tightly. She whispered softly, "It's okay, sweetheart." I watched our family SUV disappear down the dusty country road. No one looked back, not even once. That night I asked Aunt Margaret when Mom and Dad would call. "They're probably busy traveling. They'll call tomorrow." Tomorrow became 4 days, then a week. Eventually I stopped waiting by the phone. Aunt Margaret noticed. She never criticized my parents. Instead, she quietly filled the emptiness they left behind. She taught me how to bake peach pie, how to ride horses, how to grow tomatoes, how to catch fireflies on warm July evenings. She loved me with a gentleness I didn't understand until years later. At the end of August, my parents finally returned. They handed me a pink Disney sweatshirt. Dad smiled, "Look what we brought you." I forced a smile. "Thanks." Then Ethan shouted, "I met Mickey." He showed me hundreds of pictures. Mom laughed at every story. Dad described every ride. No one asked what I'd done all summer. Not one question. Not even, "Did you miss us?" I quietly carried my suitcase upstairs. That night I cried into my pillow for the first time. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last. The next summer it happened again, this time Hawaii. I went back to Aunt Margaret's farm, then California. I stayed behind. Colorado, I stayed behind. Alaska, I stayed behind. Europe, I stayed behind. Every June the pattern repeated. Mom packed matching outfits for herself and Ethan. Dad reserved expensive hotels. Family photographs filled our living room walls. Every single frame included the three of them. Whenever relatives visited, they'd point toward the pictures. What a beautiful family. Nobody noticed someone was missing. Eventually, I noticed something even worse. They weren't forgetting me. They were choosing not to include me. One Christmas, I asked Dad carefully, "Why don't I ever get to go?" He barely looked up from his newspaper. "Someone has to stay with Aunt Margaret." "But why me?" "Ethan's younger." The answer sounded reasonable until Ethan became older. At 12, he still went. I still didn't. When I turned 13, I overheard something I was never supposed to hear. Mom was talking to one of her friends in the kitchen. She didn't know I was standing in the hallway. She laughed before saying, "It makes vacations so much easier with only one child." Her friend asked, "Does Emily ever complain?" Mom sighed. "She used to." "What do you tell her?" "That Margaret enjoys having her." Then they both laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, just casually, as though discussing the weather. That casual laugh broke something inside me, because I finally understood. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about logistics. It wasn't because Ethan was younger. My parents simply preferred pretending they had only one child whenever life became convenient. That realization changed me. I stopped asking to join them. I stopped expecting birthday surprises. I stopped believing promises. Instead, I poured every ounce of my energy into school. Books never rejected me. Teachers noticed me. Writing became my escape. Every story I wrote contained children searching for a place they belonged. I didn't realize then I was writing about myself. One afternoon, my 8th grade English teacher returned one of my essays. Across the top, written in bright blue ink, were words I'd never forget. "Emily, your voice matters. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." I read that sentence over and over, because nobody at home had ever said anything like it. That teacher had unknowingly given me something my own parents never had. Hope. And I made myself one silent promise. If my own family refused to see my worth, one day the rest of the world would. The day I left Aunt Margaret's farm for college, she hugged me longer than ever before. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for becoming successful," she whispered. I nodded, trying not to cry. "I'll come visit every chance I get." She smiled. "I know you will." Before I got into my car, she handed me a brown envelope. "Keep these documents safe." Inside were copies of my grandmother's will, trust paperwork, and financial records. "Don't confront your parents until you're ready," she warned. "They'll deny everything." I slipped the envelope into my backpack. I understand. For the first time in my life, I wasn't leaving home with hope. I was leaving with questions. College became everything my childhood had never been. At the University of North Carolina, nobody knew me as Ethan's sister. I was simply Emily Carter, the girl whose essays professors loved, the student who never missed deadlines, the freshman who worked 2 campus jobs while maintaining a perfect GPA. I spent mornings in lectures, afternoons working in the university library, evenings tutoring freshmen, weekends writing freelance articles for online magazines. Life was exhausting, but every accomplishment belonged to me. Nobody could take credit for it. Meanwhile, back home, almost nothing changed. Mom called once every few weeks, mostly to ask whether I needed anything. Not because she wanted to help, because she wanted to know if my scholarship covered everything. Dad rarely called at all. Whenever he did, the conversations lasted less than 5 minutes. "Class is good?" "Yes." Grades okay? Yes. All right. Click, that was our relationship. The only person who called regularly was Ethan. He had started high school and loved talking about basketball, friends, and video games. One evening he laughed. You should have seen Dad trying to grill steaks. I smiled. Did he burn them again? Worse. He almost set the patio umbrella on fire. For 20 minutes we laughed like normal siblings. Then his voice became quieter. Emily, can I ask something? Sure. Why don't you come home very often? I hesitated. I've been busy. No, I mean before college. Why did you always stay with Aunt Margaret? I froze. You don't know. Know what? I always thought you wanted to. My heart sank. Of course he thought that. That was probably what our parents had told him. Thanksgiving arrived. For the first time in months, I returned home. The house looked exactly the same. The walls were still covered with vacation photographs. Only now there were even more. Pictures from Greece, Santorini sunsets, family cruises, smiling faces, 3 people, never 4. I stood there quietly until Mom noticed. Oh, we've been meaning to print one with everyone? Everyone, after 9 years. The sentence almost made me laugh. Dinner felt painfully awkward. Dad asked about internships. Mom asked about classes. Ethan carried the entire conversation. After dessert, I finally spoke. I visited Aunt Margaret before coming here. Mom smiled politely. That's nice. She gave me something. Dad looked up. What? I slowly placed the brown envelope on the dining table. I found Grandma Aliner's trust documents. Silence. Absolute silence. Mom's smile disappeared instantly. Dad didn't blink. For several seconds nobody moved. Finally Dad spoke. Why would Margaret give you those? Because Grandma wanted me to have them. Mom quickly interrupted. Those papers are old. They don't matter anymore. I calmly looked at her. They matter to me. Dad crossed his arms. What exactly are you trying to say? I opened the folder. This says Grandma divided everything equally between Ethan and me. That's correct. So, where's my share? Mom answered immediately. Your grandmother's medical bills were expensive. I nodded. I checked. They were already paid before she passed away. Dad's expression hardened. You've been snooping. No, I've been reading. There is a difference. Mom stood up. This conversation is over. I remained seated. No, it's just beginning. I slid another document across the table. The lake cabin. It sold for over $600,000. Dad stared at the paper. I continued. The investment account. The trust. The savings bonds. My college fund. Where did my half go? Nobody answered. Then something happened that shocked me. Ethan looked confused. What trust? Mom quickly turned toward him. Eat your dessert. No, what trust? Dad sighed. It's complicated. Ethan looked at me. Emily, what are you talking about? I slowly handed him one copy of the paperwork. He began reading. 30 seconds later, his face turned pale. He looked at Mom. Grandma left money for both of us? Mom didn't answer. He looked at Dad. Did she? Dad rubbed his forehead. Yes. Ethan frowned. So, why didn't Emily get hers? Again silence. For years I had believed Ethan knew everything. I thought he willingly accepted the favoritism. But sitting across from him that night I realized something. He had been lied to, too, not in the same way, but lied to nonetheless. Finally Dad spoke. We used some of the money. Some? Dad looked away. My business was struggling. Mom added quietly, we intended to replace it. I laughed. Intended? It's been 12 years. Nobody spoke. I continued. So my inheritance paid for your business? Dad nodded once. And family vacations? Mom's eyes filled with tears. We never meant to hurt you. I looked around the dining room, at every vacation picture, at every smiling memory, at every reminder that I'd never belonged. You succeeded. Ethan suddenly pushed back his chair. You used Emily's money? Dad stood. It wasn't like that. Then explain it. Mom started crying. We always planned to tell you both. When? I asked quietly. When we died. That night ended without answers. I packed my overnight bag. As I reached the front door, Dad spoke. Emily, I stopped. We'll figure this out. I turned around slowly. For 9 years, I waited for you to choose me. You never did. I'm done waiting. I walked out. The cold November air felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in my life, I hadn't stayed silent. And deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Because within 6 months, a letter from an attorney would arrive, and my parents would discover that ignoring one daughter's childhood had become the most expensive mistake of their entire lives. 6 months passed. I buried myself in college, classes, internships, writing competitions, late-night shifts at the university library. I had finally built a life that didn't revolve around wondering whether my parents loved me. The silence between us remained. Mom texted occasionally. Dad almost never did. Ethan called every week. Our relationship had actually grown stronger since Thanksgiving. He kept apologizing for something that had never been his fault. One evening he said quietly, "I don't know how Mom and Dad hid this from me." I sighed. They hid it from both of us. They just hid different parts. In April of my junior year, I received a phone call from Aunt Margaret. Her voice sounded unusually serious. "Emily, I think it's time." "Time for what?" I met with an attorney. My heart began racing. "The documents your grandmother left are stronger than I realized." "What do you mean?" "Your parents weren't allowed to use your trust money." I froze. They violated their legal responsibility as trustees. So they could actually be held responsible. I sat down on a bench outside the library. "I never wanted revenge," Margaret spoke gently. "This isn't revenge, it's accountability." A week later, I met attorney Daniel Brooks in Charlotte. His office overlooked downtown. After reading every document, he leaned back in his chair. "I've handled trust disputes for over 20 years. This one is surprisingly clear." I frowned. "So I'm not imagining this?" "No. According to these records, your grandmother established separate trusts for both grandchildren." He tapped the paperwork. "Money designated for one beneficiary cannot simply be spent on unrelated family expenses." "What happens now?" He folded his hands. "We send a formal demand. And if they refuse, we file suit." The room fell silent. I never imagined I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office because of my own parents. 3 weeks later, the certified letter arrived at my parents' house. I wasn't there, but Ethan called me that evening. His voice was shaking. "Emily, they got the attorney's letter." "How did they react?" "Dad threw it across the kitchen." "And Mom? She's been crying for 2 hours." I closed my eyes. I didn't want this. I know, but maybe they need to finally face it. 2 days later, my phone rang. "Dad," for the first time in months, I answered. "Hello." His voice was unusually calm. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "You've gone too far." I laughed softly. "I asked where my inheritance went." "You hired a lawyer." "I hired someone because you refused to answer." He became irritated. "Families don't sue each other." I replied quietly. "Families don't erase one child for 9 summers either." Silence. Then he hung up. A month later, we met in mediation instead of a courtroom. It was the first time all 5 of us had been in the same room since Thanksgiving. Mom looked exhausted. Dad had aged noticeably. Ethan sat beside me instead of beside them. That simple decision seemed to break Mom's heart. The mediator began calmly. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, do you dispute using trust assets intended for your daughter?" Dad lowered his head. "No." "Do you dispute excluding Emily from family vacations for approximately 9 years? Another pause. "No." Mom began crying again. "We thought she'd understand when she was older." I looked directly at her. "I was 7. There is nothing a 7-year-old understands about abandonment." The room fell silent. The financial records painted an ugly picture. My trust had funded business losses, luxury vacations, home renovations, Ethan's private sports academy, 2 new vehicles. None of it had been legal. Ethan looked horrified. "You used Emily's future to pay for mine," Mom whispered. "We thought we'd replace it." "When?" he asked. "When she graduated? When she got married?" "When?" Neither parent answered. The mediator suggested a settlement, every dollar from my trust, investment growth, Interest, attorney fees, everything. Dad stared at the numbers. It would require selling vacation property, refinancing their house, liquidating investments. His retirement plans would disappear. For several minutes, he simply stared at the paper. Then, for the first time in my entire life, my father looked at me with genuine regret. "I'm sorry," not the casual apology parents give children. A real one. "I failed you. I chose the easier child to parent. I convinced myself you'd forgive me because you were strong." His voice cracked. "I didn't realize I was the reason you had to become strong." Tears filled my eyes. Those words were everything I'd wanted to hear for nearly 20 years. But they came far too late. Mom finally spoke. "I have hundreds of vacation pictures. I realized something yesterday." I waited. "There isn't a single one where all four of us are together." She broke down crying. "I spent years telling people I loved both my children equally. But photographs don't lie, neither do memories." The settlement was signed that afternoon. My inheritance would be fully restored over the next 3 years. The family cabin money, investment returns, everything. Legally, the matter was finished. Emotionally, nothing had been repaired. As we walked toward the parking lot, Dad called my name. "Emily." I turned around. "We're taking one last family vacation this summer." My heart skipped. Then he quietly asked, "Would you come with us?" For a brief moment, 7-year-old Emily wanted to say yes. She wanted Disneyland, the beaches, the photographs she dreamed about. But 21-year-old Emily knew the truth. You can't recreate a childhood after it's already gone. I smiled sadly. "No," Dad looked down. "I understand. I already have plans." "What plans?" I looked toward Aunt Margaret, who was waiting by her truck. "I'm spending the summer with the person who never once made me feel like I didn't belong." Then I walked away. Not because I hated my parents, but because healing sometimes means choosing peace over pretending the past never happened. The drive back to Aunt Margaret's farmhouse was quiet. Neither of us spoke for nearly 20 minutes. The windows were down, letting the warm Carolina breeze drift through the truck. Finally, she smiled. "You look different." I laughed softly. "I just finished one of the hardest days of my life." "No," she replied. "You look lighter." She was right. For the first time since I was 7 years old, I wasn't carrying the burden of wondering whether I had done something wrong. I finally understood the truth. There had never been anything wrong with me. The problem had always been the choices my parents made. That summer wasn't spent at a beach resort. It wasn't spent on a cruise ship. It wasn't filled with expensive hotels. Instead, I stayed at the farmhouse. Every morning started with coffee on the porch. Every afternoon was spent helping Aunt Margaret restore the old barn. Every evening ended watching the sunset over the fields. For the first time, I wasn't someone's second choice. I was exactly where I belonged. After graduating from college with honors, I accepted a position at one of the largest publishing companies in New York City. The little girl who escaped into books had become a professional editor and author. Within 3 years, I published my first novel. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about money. It was about a little girl who spent years searching for a place to belong. Readers across America connected with the story. Letters arrived every week. One woman wrote, "Your book helped me understand my own childhood." Another reader said, "For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone." Every letter reminded me why I had kept writing. Pain had become purpose. One evening, Ethan came to visit me in New York. He looked nervous. "I've wanted to tell you something." I smiled. "You don't have to apologize again." "I'm not." He reached into his backpack and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. I looked at the amount. It was $50,000. I stared at him. "What is this?" "My first bonus from work." I immediately shook my head. "I can't take this." "Yes, you can. It wasn't your fault." "I know, but my opportunities came from money that should have been yours." I pushed the check back across the table. "No, if you really want to make things right, promise me something." "What?" "If you ever have children, never let one wonder whether they're loved less than the other." Tears filled his eyes. "I promise." We hugged for a long time. That day I didn't just gain my brother, I gained a lifelong friend. People often ask whether my parents ever changed. The answer is yes. But change doesn't erase consequences. Every month they faithfully made the court-ordered payments, not because they had to, because they wanted to. Dad sold his vacation property. Mom retired early and started volunteering at a family counseling center. She later admitted, "I spent years believing providing financially made me a good mother. I forgot children remember time more than money." Dad closed his architecture company after nearly 30 years. Instead, he began mentoring young business owners for free. One day he told me, "I spent my career designing beautiful houses. I should have spent more time building a beautiful home." That sentence stayed with me. One Christmas, several years later, my parents invited everyone to dinner. I almost declined, but Aunt Margaret smiled. "Go, not for them, for yourself." When I arrived, something immediately caught my attention. The hallway looked different. The old vacation photographs were gone, every single one. In their place were new family pictures. Graduations, Thanksgiving dinners, birthdays, simple moments, nothing expensive, nothing glamorous, just everyone together. 4 people, not 3. Mom noticed me staring. She quietly said, "I couldn't bear looking at the old ones anymore. They reminded me of everything we stole from you." I simply nodded. Some regrets never disappear. A few years later, Aunt Margaret became ill. She remained positive until the very end. One afternoon, I sat beside her hospital bed. She smiled weakly. "You know, you were never sent to me by accident." I squeezed her hand. "What do you mean?" She laughed softly. "I always suspected God knew one of us needed the other." Tears rolled down my face. "You saved me?" "No," she whispered. "You saved yourself. I simply reminded you who you already were." She passed away peacefully 2 days later. At her funeral, the church was completely full. Farmers, teachers, neighbors, former students, children she had helped. She had spent her entire life making people feel wanted. Exactly what she had done for me. In her will, she left me the farmhouse, along with one handwritten letter. It read, "A home isn't the place where you're born. It's the place where someone waits for you to come back." I cried harder than I ever had. Years later, Dad asked if we could have lunch, just the 2 of us. After dessert, he looked at me. "If I could change one thing, I'd cancel every vacation. I'd trade every photograph. I'd give every dollar back, just to watch you build one sandcastle beside your brother." Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, I reached across the table. "I forgive you." He looked shocked. "Really?" "Yes, but forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to carry the anger anymore." He nodded with tears in his eyes. "I understand." For the first time, so did I. People often think the greatest form of revenge is watching those who hurt you lose everything. They're wrong. The greatest revenge is building a life so full of peace, love, and purpose that their rejection no longer defines your future. My parents spent 9 summers trying to create the perfect family by leaving one child behind. Instead, they spent the rest of their lives wishing they could get those summers back. As for me, I eventually had children of my own. Every summer we took one family vacation. Sometimes it was just a weekend camping trip. Sometimes it was a road trip. Sometimes it was nothing more than a picnic in a local park. But before every trip, I'd count the heads in the car. 1, 2, 3, 4. No one was ever left behind, because I knew exactly how it felt to watch your family drive away without you. And I promised myself, no child of mine would ever have to stand at a window wondering why there wasn't a seat saved for them.